Have you ever sat in a quiet room, thinking about the days when your house was full of laughter, noisy dinners, and the sound of your children coming through the door? Maybe now that door hasn't opened in months, maybe even years. You might find yourself staring at your phone, wondering if today's the day they'll call. You remember their birthdays, their favorite meals, how their eyes lit up at certain songs. And yet, all that love, everything you gave, feels like it disappeared into silence. If that sounds familiar, please know this. You're not the only one. You did your best. You poured your heart into being a mother. And still, for some reason, you might not fully understand. Your child has drifted or even disappeared out of your life. That pain, it cuts deeper than words can express. But you're not alone, and more importantly, you are not broken. You are not a failure, and you are not beyond hope. Estrangement between parents and their adult children is one of the most misunderstood and unspoken heartbreaks of our time. It's not something we talk about at church potlucks or over coffee with friends. It's heavy. It's confusing. It's embarrassing for some. But the truth is, it's more common than you think, and hiding it only makes it worse. Let's start here. You are not the only one going through this. More and more families are facing this painful reality. In fact, studies have shown that around 27% of Americans experience some form of family estrangement. And when we look at mothers specifically, mothers just like you, 11% are completely cut off from at least one child. That's not a rare case. That's more than 1 in 10 mothers sitting silently with the same ache in their heart. You may have done everything right, or at least tried your hardest. You gave them food, education, values, love. Maybe you weren't perfect, but you showed up. You sacrificed. You prayed. And still, here you are. No returned calls, no visits on the holidays, maybe even blocked on social media. It feels personal, because it is. It feels like rejection, because it is. But that doesn't mean it's your fault. One of the hardest things to accept is that even good mothers, yes, good mothers, can end up estranged from their children. It doesn't always happen because of abuse or big fights. Sometimes it's something much smaller, much quieter, and much harder to name. And that leads us to something else I want you to hear loud and clear. There is no such thing as a perfect mother. You've probably heard that before, but deep down, do you believe it? Or is there still a little voice inside you saying, if I had just done this differently, if I hadn't said that, if I could only explain? So many mothers I've spoken to, strong, caring, wise women, spend years carrying guilt that doesn't belong to them. They try to replay conversations in their head. They try to figure out where it all went wrong. They think, if I can just explain what I meant, they'll understand. If I can defend myself, they'll see I didn't mean to hurt them. But here's the hard truth. Defending yourself doesn't always heal the wound. In fact, sometimes it makes the distance grow. Research from family coaches and therapists shows that a large number of estranged moms, up to 78%, admit they often react from a place of guilt. Not from peace, not from clarity, but from that painful, desperate place of, what did I do wrong? And nearly 73% say they don't feel heard at all when they do try to talk with their child. That's heartbreaking, because your intentions can be good, your love can be real, but the way it's received might not match the way it's given. So what happens? A cycle begins. You reach out to explain. They pull further away. You try again, maybe with more urgency or more emotion, and they go silent. I want to tell you something that may set you free. You don't have to prove that you were a good mother to deserve love. You already are worthy. You don't have to earn your child's presence by carrying their distance like it's a punishment for your failures. The myth of the perfect mother is just that, a myth. It was never real to begin with, and chasing it will only wear you down. So if you've been caught in that exhausting loop of guilt and explanation, I want to invite you to pause. Just breathe, because this next part is important. Let's talk about why estrangement happens. Not the myths, not the assumptions, but the real, complicated truth. Sometimes people think a mother-child split happens because of one explosive argument, a major betrayal, or something obviously damaging. And yes, that does happen in some cases. But most of the time, estrangement doesn't start with a fire. It starts with a slow leak. It can be a gradual breakdown of communication. Little misunderstandings that build up over time. Maybe one person needed more emotional support than the other realized. Maybe there were unspoken expectations that went unmet. Maybe there were shifts in values, politics, religion, or lifestyle that created tension without either side really knowing how to talk about it. And let's not ignore the role of generational differences. The way your generation was taught to parent, strict but loving, structured, practical, might feel completely foreign or even hurtful to a younger generation raised on therapy speak and emotional validation. You might have thought, I didn't say anything that bad. But in their world, it might have felt like judgment, even if that wasn't your intent. Other times, estrangement has nothing to do with what you did or didn't do. Sometimes it's about their own internal struggles. Depression, anxiety, addiction, stress from their own relationships, or even influence from a spouse or friend. Social media can also be a toxic echo chamber, feeding them messaging like, cut off anyone who doesn't make you feel good 100% of the time, even your parents. In their desire to protect their mental space, they may have miscategorized you as a threat, when all you ever wanted was to love and guide them. It hurts. It's unfair. And it's often based on incomplete information, assumptions, or emotional pain that has nothing to do with you. But knowing these things can actually give you something powerful. Clarity. Clarity helps you stop spinning in circles of guilt. It allows you to say, this is bigger than me, and I can only control my part. That kind of clarity doesn't fix the relationship overnight, but it's the first step in healing yourself. And when you heal yourself, you change the energy you bring to the table. You become steadier, stronger, and more open-hearted. Not desperate, not defensive, but deeply grounded. And from that place, reconciliation becomes possible. When a mother reaches that place of inner clarity, where the guilt loosens its grip and the silence doesn't define her anymore, something powerful begins to shift. Because when your sense of worth is no longer tied to how your child responds to you, you're free to move forward with grace instead of fear. And yet, even with that clarity, one question still remains. How do you begin rebuilding the connection? Now, let me say this gently but truthfully. Rebuilding doesn't happen overnight. You can't rush a process that involves hearts, memories, and wounds on both sides. But you can take steps. Real steps. Quiet, thoughtful steps. And those steps matter more than you may think. Rebuilding a bridge between a mother and her child doesn't start with a grand apology or a dramatic gesture. It starts with how you respond to the smallest moment. It starts with your energy, your words, your ability to listen before you speak. And that begins with something so simple yet often overlooked. Pause. That moment, right before you reply to a message, write a letter, or even pick up the phone, hold space for stillness. Don't jump to explain yourself. Don't lead with old stories or reminders of what you've done. Just pause. Breathe. Because here's the truth. You won't get all your answers in that first conversation. It might not even feel like progress. But if your words are calm and your tone open, you plant a seed. And in this kind of healing, seeds matter. Let's imagine your child sends you a short, cold message. Your instinct might be to defend yourself or ask why they're being distant. But what if instead you simply replied, "Thank you for reaching out. I'd love to hear more when you're ready." That kind of answer doesn't close doors. It leaves room for trust to return. Next, as hard as this may be, validate their feelings. Not because you agree with everything they say, not because they're right about the past, but because everyone wants to be heard. You might say, "I hear you. I can see this matters to you, and I'm sorry that this hurt you." That sentence alone can disarm so much tension, even if their version of events doesn't match your memory, even if you think they're being unfair, because this isn't about blame, it's about connection. And connection requires one person to go first. As a mother, you've probably gone first 1,000 times before. This time you're doing it with wisdom. Now I know what you might be thinking. What about my voice? Don't I get to tell my side? Absolutely. But timing is everything. When trust is low, listening builds more bridges than explaining. And the best way to invite conversation is by asking open-ended questions. Instead of saying, "Why haven't you called me?" Try, "Can you help me understand how you're feeling right now?" Or, "What would feel helpful to you in our relationship?" Those questions aren't traps. They aren't tests. They're invitations. And when you offer an invitation instead of a lecture, you give your child something they may not even realize they need, a safe space to talk. I've watched this shift work wonders. In fact, I've known mothers who were estranged from their children for years. 5, 10, even 20, and they slowly found their way back through these very steps. Not by fixing everything, not by forcing anything, but by showing up with humility, patience, and love. And that leads to one of the most important truths of all. Reconnection is not about changing the past. It's about changing how you show up now. Your past might include moments of pain, misunderstanding, or even distance you didn't mean to create. But today, you get to choose how you respond. Today you can be the calm in the storm, the open heart, the steady hand that doesn't reach to control but simply waits with compassion. That doesn't mean you accept mistreatment or allow your boundaries to be violated. Rebuilding a relationship isn't about becoming smaller, it's about becoming stronger in the right ways. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to heal, even if your child hasn't come around yet. And sometimes that healing has to start without them. So what does that look like, practically? It looks like waking up in the morning and choosing to take care of yourself, not in spite of the estrangement, but because of it. It looks like releasing the need to know when or if they'll call. It looks like writing letters you may never send, just to get the feelings out of your heart and onto paper. It looks like finding community, whether through a support group, a friend who understands, or even just moments like this one, where you realize you're not the only one carrying this pain. Because here's what often surprises people. Healing doesn't always start with reconciliation. Sometimes it begins with grief. And yes, grief is part of estrangement. It's the loss of what was, the longing for what could be, and the deep ache for what never quite happened. But grief, when acknowledged, can transform into strength. It can lead you to clarity, and clarity leads you to freedom. One of the most powerful things I've heard from mothers who've walked through this valley and come out the other side is this: I stopped waiting to be chosen again. I chose myself. That doesn't mean they gave up on their child. It means they stopped making their entire life revolve around the silence. They stopped measuring their worth by the number of missed calls. They started living again. And in many cases, that shift changed everything. Because here's another truth: estrangement doesn't always last forever. Studies show that 81% of estranged mothers eventually reconnect with their children. But often that reconnection comes after a period of personal transformation. It doesn't come from pushing. It comes from peace. So if you're listening right now and thinking, I don't know if I have that kind of strength, let me assure you, yes, you do. You've carried babies. You've survived heartbreaks. You've built homes and held families together when the world felt like it was falling apart. You are resilient, and your story isn't over. You may not be able to control when or how your child responds, but you can choose how you respond. You can choose whether to carry guilt or release it. You can choose whether to live in fear or grow in peace. And you can choose right now to take the first step toward healing. There's something beautiful that happens when a mother stops chasing answers and starts standing in her own peace. It doesn't mean she stops loving. It doesn't mean she gives up. It means she finally understands that her worth doesn't depend on being needed or even being welcomed. It comes from who she is at her core. Rebuilding a relationship with an estranged child isn't about proving anything. It's not a courtroom. It's not a contest. It's not even always about finding agreement. Most of the time, it's simply about rebuilding safety, emotional safety. And that can only happen when at least one person shows up without judgment, without pressure, and without a desperate need to be right. When that person is the mother, when that person is you, it sends a quiet, steady message. I am here. I am not here to argue. I am not here to convince. I am simply here to love in a way that doesn't cost me my peace. Some people think forgiveness is the final step. I don't believe that. I believe forgiveness is what opens the door to everything else. But it's not just about forgiving your child. It's also about forgiving yourself. Yes, you made mistakes. All parents do. Yes, maybe there were moments where you said things you now regret or handled situations in ways you wish you could redo. But holding on to that shame won't change the past, and it won't help the future. At some point, you have to offer yourself the same grace you'd give a friend. Would you tell another mother, one who did her best and is now sitting in silence, that she's unworthy of healing? Of course not. You'd tell her to keep breathing, keep hoping, and keep loving herself. You'd remind her that estrangement says more about the brokenness in a relationship than it does about her value as a person. So maybe today, you need to hear that for yourself. You are not your worst moment. You are not the argument that ended it all. You are not the silence they're keeping now. You are still a mother. You are still a whole human being. And you are still worthy of love, connection, and a future filled with peace. And speaking of the future, what does it actually look like to move forward? Some mothers begin again by focusing on themselves, often for the first time in decades. They join a book club. They take long walks in the morning sun. They write their stories down. They find joy in small things. Folding laundry while listening to music, baking a favorite recipe just for themselves, calling up old friends they haven't spoken to in years. Others begin reaching out in small, gentle ways. A holiday card, not expecting a reply. A text message just saying, "Thinking of you," without pushing for more. A message sent on a birthday, simply saying, "I hope today brings you peace." These little acts aren't about fixing the relationship overnight. They're about reminding your child that the door is still open and always has been. And sometimes, though not always, those gestures begin to soften walls that felt permanent. Now let me be honest. There are cases where reconciliation doesn't happen. The door doesn't open. The call doesn't come. And I know that's hard to accept. But even in that, there can be peace. Because your healing does not depend on their return. It depends on your decision to keep living, keep growing, and keep loving, even in the absence of what you long for. Life after 60 is not the end of your story. It's a new chapter, One where you finally get to ask yourself, what do I need? What brings me joy? Who do I want to be with or without their approval? You're allowed to invest in yourself now. You're allowed to rediscover who you are outside of being a mother. Because while motherhood shaped your life, it is not the sum total of your identity. You're still a woman, a friend, a thinker, a dreamer, maybe even a teacher for others walking the same road. And let's not forget this, your journey matters. Your pain has meaning. The courage it takes to face estrangement and still show up with love, that's not weakness. That's strength of the highest kind. You never stopped being a mother. You just learned how to mother yourself too. And maybe that's the final piece in rebuilding the bridge. Not just between you and your child, but between you and yourself. Because when you reconnect with who you are, when you start living from a place of truth instead of shame, that energy radiates outward. It shifts how you interact with others. It makes your presence feel safe, not demanding. It turns silence into stillness and stillness into strength. Some people might tell you it's too late, that the time for healing has passed. But those people don't know what it means to be a mother. They don't understand that love doesn't disappear. It just changes form. Even if your child never says it out loud, they know you love them. And one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe in 5 years, maybe never, they may turn around and realize they miss that love. They may want to return to it in their own way, in their own time. And when they do, you'll be ready. Not desperate, not broken, but whole, peaceful, and open-hearted. Until then, live, truly live, not in waiting, not in mourning, but in hope. Hope, not as a strategy, but as a posture. Hope that allows room for joy even in sorrow. Hope that lets you smile again, dance again, laugh again. You don't have to put your life on pause for a call that may or may not come. You are allowed to press play now. So here's my invitation to you. If you're watching this and you've made it this far, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell your story if you feel safe, or simply write, "I'm here." You never know who might read your words and feel less alone. And if this video spoke to your heart, please give it a thumbs up so others can find it too. Subscribe to Strong Elderly Life for more content made just for you, because your journey matters, and we're here to walk it with you. You've lived through so much, and yet the most peaceful, meaningful part of your life might still be ahead. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. And you are certainly not finished. Here's to living your best life at any age, with love, with courage, and with a heart that keeps opening, even after being hurt. Take care of yourself. You are worth it.